We're pleased to be joined this morning by witnesses from Thames Water. You're all very welcome. We appreciate your attendance and your efforts to be here and to answer our questions. Just for the benefit of those following our proceedings and indeed for our own official record, can I ask you, gentlemen, to introduce yourselves to the committee?
Certainly. My name is Chris Weston. I'm the Chief Executive of Thames Water.
I'm Adrian Montague. I'm the Chairman of Thames Water.
I'm Steve Buck, Chief Financial Officer of Thames Water.
Okay. Well, you're all very welcome. Sir Adrian, welcome back to the committee. Obviously a different committee from the one that you last appeared before. Chris, if I can maybe just ask you, for starters, about what sort of company you want Thames Water to be. What is the culture and the values that you want to bring in your leadership of that company?
I would like Thames Water to be a high-performing company where the employees enjoy working there, they feel supported in what they do, and it delivers for its customers and it delivers for the environment. It is financially sound, and all the various operational metrics that you would look at in a water company are doing what they should and continuously improving. Culture. Culture is absolutely fundamental. Thames is the 8th company I've run, and culture has been important in every single one of them. As I came into Thames, I have to say I was very impressed with, well, one, what we do every day, and I know it gets overlooked, but 2.6 billion litres of clean water every day and 5 billion litres of waste dealt with every day. I couldn't help but being impressed coming from outside the industry. I was also impressed with the people I met, committed and passionate about the company, working very hard, and I think very honest and transparent about what they do. I think where it had gone wrong is that Thames had lost direction a bit. I think I was the 5th CEO in 5 years, 3 CFOs, and 26 members of the executive had been through the company. And that creates a confusion for people in the company. And I don't think there was any lack of willingness to do the job or willingness to take on accountability and be held responsible for what they do. And I think it required clearer direction, which I have given, a clear organisation structure that matched resource to the performance that was expected of the people, and then a governance structure around it that allows them, or allows me and the board, to understand our performance and how we are performing and discuss it with people. And I want the people in the company to feel that they have clear direction, they have the right resources, and they are supported in what they do. And my job is to make them feel supported and confident in what they are doing.
Mm-hmm. And how are you doing on that journey then?
Well, 16 months in, I'm quite pleased with the progress we're making. I mean, it's a big ship to turn around. It is very difficult. My 2 priorities coming in were, one, to create stability around the finances and restructure the balance sheet, and I think we've made good progress with that. And the other was a firmer operational foundation. With respect to that second, we have changed the setup within the company. I suppose it starts with recognising we are an infrastructure company, and if we get our infrastructure right, it delivers for our customers and for the environment. And so I set up a team looking at the infrastructure. And within that, we have a team focused on water and a team focused on waste. And we have also introduced, which was not there before, a capital allocation and governance structure, which is absolutely fundamental, I think, to a company like Thames. And so by putting that structure in place, people were clear on the resources that they were being given and also the performance that was expected of them. I mean, there's still a lot more to do. I have also gone out of my way to invest in developing the leadership of Thames. I think leadership is where culture starts. It is absolutely critical to setting the right culture. So we have had a program rolling out in the company looking at leadership, which a lot of it is all about behaviour. So we are making progress, but this is a long task. It's going to take a long time to turn Thames round.
Well, I mean, because there's a basic lack of transparency and understanding about the structures. We will come to this later. I'm not going to dwell on it at the moment. But it's apparent to few who actually controls and owns Thames effectively at the moment. We will come to this, but I think it's important, given that you've laid some heavy emphasis on transparency there, and also on leadership. I mean, you yourself are on a total package of 2.3 million, which is a generous package for a very responsible job, I think. 3 months in, you accepted a bonus of 195,000. That's 3 months into your tenure. With hindsight, was that a wise thing to do if you were wanting to assert that sort of leadership in the company?
So my remuneration was agreed with the board before I came on board. I mean, it was not the reason, but it was a reason for me joining Thames. Fundamentally, I joined Thames because it matters to society, and I felt with my experience and track record, I could make a difference. And I still believe that. And I agreed with the board that when I came in that I would participate in the bonus structure and all its performance criteria, which had been set before I joined, and I would be a member of the whole leadership and management team. And that was very important to me, consistent across the whole leadership and management team. By and large, people that I talk to recognise the magnitude of the job that is in front of me and that we have undertaken. And I think that within the first 3 months, I did make a difference. I started to put in place the new organisation structure. I started to give people confidence and reassurance about how proud they could be of the job they did and what we were setting out to do. And that helped stabilise the company. And I think that was important.
Okay, because 10 months in, you had this BBC documentary, Inside the Crisis, and you told that documentary, and I quote, I don't know how it got this way. I've only been here 10 months. I want to fix it. I don't know how it got this way. 10 months in a job of this sort, you weren't able to explain how we had got to the place that we were. Must make it, if you don't know what's happened, what's gone wrong, it must be difficult to put things right. Where's your analysis today of how you got to where this company is?
So I am pretty clear about how we got to where we've got to now. I was pretty clear then, but I also question the value of talking about it publicly and pointing the finger.
Well, just between the two of us then.
So I'm clear how we've got here. This has been decades in the making, the crisis that we face at Thames, and I think all actors have had a role to play in this. So absolutely, the company and management has got it wrong. 5 chief executives in 5 years is not a recipe for success. And I would argue consistency in leadership is a very important part of what we need to do now. But equally, I think the fundamental problem has been with the regulatory regime. And there are flaws in the regulatory regime. I think that has been recognised by the recent NAO report and also the government commissioning Sir John Cunliffe to undertake a review of the water industry. So there's a lot that goes right. It is absolutely necessary that we have a regulator, but that at the same time, the regulatory regime needs to attract investment, and it needs to allow for companies of different types operating in different environments with different cost bases, and also for companies that might be in trouble, that they can turn around and improve their performance. And I would argue the regulatory regime does not do that at the moment. And I think the NAO and Sir John Cunliffe, there's a lot in that that agrees with what I have just said. So there are many authors to where we are now.
But you can't be surely blaming the regulatory regime entirely.
No,
I mean, in 2022, you lost £1 billion in derivatives. Is that correct?
I would have to come back.
That wouldn't be a matter. I mean, but it is a particularly serious situation when you're dealing with one of the most essential utility products on the planet. You've got a complete monopoly, and effectively you've got the government standing behind you, and you still manage to come to this place. Look, we want the session today to be forward-looking, but we do need to hear from you as a leadership team, I think, a better understanding and acknowledgement of how we have got to this place. I mean, the involvement with Macquarie, for example, is something that's fairly well documented. I'm not going to rehearse it. Right. But how much of that do you think played a role in bringing you to where you are today?
That will have exacerbated the situation because the gearing went up during the time of Macquarie's ownership, and they took dividends.
Gearing is now, what, 83%, is it?
I think the most current is higher than that, about 88%.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. It's not been published yet. It's where we are in our annual financial reporting cycle. So that absolutely will have contributed to the problem. It increases our gearing, and that stresses the organisation. And that certainly has not helped us. But I would also add, debt is a very important part of the model for the water industry. We are making investments now that will serve generations to come, and is paid for over generations, and the most cost-effective way to deliver that is through investment-grade debt. So, but it's excessive now. It is not what it should be, and part of what I am setting out to do, as I said at the beginning, is to make sure we have firm financial foundations which will require a restructured balance sheet.
And this question of debt brings us back to the price review and your current situation again. I'll leave others of my colleagues to come back to that later on. But just while we're talking about the churn within the senior leadership team, your former CFO left the business following criticism that he had slowed down time-critical decisions needed for basic functions. Do you share that analysis, and what impact has it had on your work as a CEO to have to bring in a CFO at such a critical time again?
I'm very grateful for the work that Al did for Thames Water over 4 years. Very stressful situation. He was largely the architect of the first restructuring plan, and I was grateful that he worked with me to manage his transition in a managed way. I've known Steve for, I think, about 15 years now. I have great confidence in him. It is hugely helpful that he knows the water industry, and that has helped me in managing the transition and getting Steve up to speed in all that needs to be done. So I am confident. Finance is a problem for us. It's organisation, the way it runs. It's a very stressful bit of the organisation because of what we are dealing with, and I'm very confident the work that Al has done and Steve will build on will give us what we need over the next few years.
I mean, we've seen it reported that senior staff were having no choice but to press ahead with purchases without sign-off. And this wasn't trivial things. This was safety-critical chemicals needed to clean water. That can't be a healthy set of financial regulation, can it?
No, there is a lot that we need to improve on in Thames. I completely accept that, and it is going to take a while. Part of it is establishing the model more deeply in the organisation, so people have their budgets and their authority, which I think they largely do at the moment, and the company continues to function during a very stressful situation. So I'm confident that we have the controls and the visibility that we need in place in the company at the moment.
So on this point then about the stress of the situation facing the company and your employees, to come back to that documentary that you took part in, we saw some really good quality people. They are very young, very promising employees leaving, an increase in mental health illness, mental health reported absences. What are you doing to support staff at the sharp end here?
I was very sorry to see Josh leave from Mogden. I mean, that is, I think, someone who will go a long way in his career. And I was sorry that we hadn't been able to give him the support that he needed. I can only act on what is in front of me, and each area of the business and the way it is structured at the moment is designed to deliver for our customers and the environment and make it easier for our frontline to do so. And that means that we give them the resources to be able to do that. We are stepping up our investment over the next 5 years, and that's both in terms of operating costs and capital costs, and both of those things will make people's jobs more easily. I have given a very clear direction that we should be planning to do 100% of our maintenance, and that is not something that we have done in the past, because that will make people's jobs easier and less stressful. And at the same time as we're doing that, we are bringing in more headcount. I don't know how many exactly, but it's probably about 500 in the last year, and there are, over the next 5 years, circa another 1,000 heads that we need to bring in. And that will undoubtedly alleviate the stress and make people's jobs easier. I also would go back to leadership. I think a leadership that is supportive and is there to try and create an environment where people can work confidently is very important. And we are also investing in our leadership. And that combination, I think, at the end of the day, might not happen overnight, I accept that, should start to alleviate the stresses and strains in the business. But a fundamental starting point will be getting the balance sheet sorted out and attracting new equity.
Josh, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, I think one of the reasons that many of your staff are so worried at the moment is because of the lack of long-term certainty over the ownership of Thames Water and what that picture might mean for them. You've got the opportunity today to allay some of those fears. So can I ask you whether you're willing to guarantee that job numbers, pay, terms and conditions will be maintained as they are now as you go through that process?
I mean, use the word guarantee, which is very difficult to use because I don't know how circumstances will change. But all I see is a growing employee base, both over the last year and over the next 5 years. So I think people should look at that realistically and take comfort from that. And within that, I mean, unless we go into SAR, which is more difficult, and even in SAR, I think their jobs are guaranteed because we have to carry on providing service to the customers. But I can't say what pressures come through that. But other than that, I see for at least the next 5 years, growing numbers of employees within Thames.
If you can't use the word guarantee, can you commit as Chief Executive that through this process of a change of ownership that you will fight for your staff's jobs, terms and conditions as that ownership changes?
Oh yes. So when I look at Thames and some of the decisions that were made before I joined around headcount, I disagree with them. They should not have been done. They were very short-term in nature. I can understand at the time that people were under a lot of pressure to make those decisions, but I will fight for every job in Thames, and I would like to think that in doing so and growing numbers, it will help people do their jobs.
So if you have a potential new owner that is looking to perhaps reduce terms and conditions, perhaps undermine staff numbers, you will make the case for that not to happen?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, what might happen is that rather than growing, I don't know, let's say 1,000, we might grow 600, 700, 800. So trying to become more efficient at the same time, which I think any business has to do. But I firmly believe that to do what we do 24/7, you need the right staffing levels within the organisation. And without that, we can't do it, and it creates unnecessary stress on the organisation. So I will absolutely be making that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to move on to your turnaround plan and performance. Sarah, can I ask you to start on this, please.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning.
Morning.
So, Adrian, Thames Water announced an 8-year turnaround plan in March 2021 under the previous Chief Executive, Sarah Bentley. In June 2023, Sarah resigned suddenly, reporting conflicts with shareholders. In December 2023, the then interim CEO, Alistair Cochrane, informed the previous committee they had refocused onto a 3-year turnaround plan to improve both the operational and financial performance. The aim of that was to improve the financial performance and stakeholder confidence in the business. How would you assess the success of that plan?
The December plan is still current. It's making good progress. I think it's perhaps an opportunity to say that we realise there is a vast amount to be done to bring performance up to scratch. And we know we are letting customers down. We know that pollutions, we know that spills, we know that supply interruptions cause inconvenience and sometimes real hardship. And so I think the right thing to do is to start a discussion of the turnaround plan by acknowledging that we haven't always served our customers as well as we should, and through the committee, apologising to them. But in terms of the turnaround, I think we are starting to see real progress. It's a very long way to go. It's a very long way to go, and sometimes it's difficult to see in the green shoots, but there are green shoots. Chris is probably closer to this detail than I am, but what we are seeing is in supply interruptions, in water quality. We are seeing real improvements in those areas. And it's such a big business, you can't hope to put everything right straight away. You've got to choose your targets and little by little improve it overall. But I think Chris is doing a great job in that respect.
Thank you. So exactly that. There are the 6 priorities that you're delivering around health and safety, pollution, customer complaints, water quality leakage, and supply interruptions. Chris, how would you judge the performance, if you give me a little bit more detail around that, against those measures that you've put in place over the period so far?
You mind if I take each in turn?
Please do, yeah.
So, health and safety is extremely important to me. It's something I have always focused on in the businesses I have run. Last year, we had, unfortunately, 35 lost time injuries compared to 41 in the year before. I point out that we did work an additional 2.6 million hours. So actually, that performance is quite good. I do think health and safety is taken seriously within Thames, and I have just appointed 6 weeks ago, a new very experienced health and safety lead to try and accelerate the progress in that area. I have to say that in the first 6 or 8 weeks of this year, we have had 7 LTIs, which pains me. There's no obvious trend in that. So that's how we're doing in health and safety. And there is a comprehensive plan around health and safety. It is very firmly owned in the line. So Esther, my COO, and David Bird, who heads up retail, who both have large workforces out and about, they understand the importance of it, as do their management teams. Perhaps to start with the 2 most frustrating areas, or maybe the most frustrating area, is leakage. We have made progress, over the AMP and over the last year. Leakage is at about 569 megalitres a day, which is a huge amount. But it is coming down slowly, and it is as low as it has ever been. We have a comprehensive plan around that, and that plan looks at how we monitor our network. So how do we see what is going on in the network? It is broken down into a number of geographic areas, which are called district meter areas, DMAs. And we can see the difference between consumption and what we provide into those areas. And so you get a good idea of where leakage is. We then deploy acoustic sensors into those areas. So we are increasing the number of acoustic sensors that we deploy into the DMAs. And as they then indicate that there is a leak there, we deploy a gang in to find the leak and to fix it. That is a never-ending process. In the next 5 years, that find and fix will cost about £1.2 billion. At the same time as doing all of that, we are investing in pressure management within the system. This is large capital expenditure that allows us to manage the pressure more effectively across the whole network and into these DMAs. And I mean, taking as an example, when we get it wrong, and I'm sure we'll come to it, like Crystal Palace, when you get a pressure surge, it can cause a mains burst. So there's a lot going into pressure management as well. And then we are doing mains replacement. And we are aiming to replace about 560 kilometres of mains in the next 5 years. We try and prioritise that, so not only does it replace the oldest mains, it also helps in leakage. But leakage is it gives me a headache thinking about it. How do we improve it? What is the silver bullet? Mm-hmm. The other area that is frustrating is pollutions. Over the last year, we have seen pollutions increase. So the year before, total number of pollutions were 350. They went up to 469 last year. Within that, there are 33 serious pollutions, and that's not acceptable. No one at Thames comes to work to cause a leakage, and everyone wants to try and minimise that as possible. When I look at what causes those leakages, about 60% of the cause is in the network as opposed to our treatment works. We have 110,000 kilometres of network, so there's a lot of network to look after. Last year, so what are we doing about it? Last year we cleaned 1,759 kilometres of network, which is about 250 odd kilometres more than we had planned to. So we are trying to be more proactive, and we are trying to use all the sensors that we have on the network and the data we get off it to predict where there's a blockage hotspot and what that we can then go and clean it. And we're developing that process slightly. At the same time as doing that, we are doing sewer rehabilitation. Last year we did 21.6 kilometres of sewer rehabilitation. Again, more than we planned to do.
I'm appreciative of the level of detail, but
Sorry.
Sometimes detail can obscure the core truth.
Okay, sorry.
And I fear that we're steering into that territory at the moment.
Okay.
Can I maybe just give you one concrete example? Sorry, Sarah, I'll come back. Your desalination plant at
Yes.
Beckton, it's reported this morning that it's not going to be operational this year. It wasn't operational the last time we needed it in 2022. It's far from clear whether it's ever worked at all. That stands in rather stark contrast to some of the detail you've been giving us. Is that not the problem for Thames Water? When it really matters, you're found to be wanting.
I wouldn't...
Well, let's deal with the desalination plant.
Okay, I mean, the desalination plant, well, the first thing I'd say is we have a team there that are working very hard to try and make it work.
Has it ever worked properly?
It has worked in the past.
It's not going to work this year, though?
No, and I share your concerns. The desalination plant is a big problem for us. I wonder why it was built in the first place.
250 million.
Yep, I accept that. It is not a good story. It was not a good investment. And so there are no excuses about it. I would point out one thing with the desalination plant, that at the moment, I mean, it relies on obviously a very complicated process that is very expensive. It has within it certain treatment membranes. Those treatment membranes are at the end of their life.
Let's just keep away from the detail. Why is it not working?
Well, we cannot replace those membranes, and we can't replace them because there is no testing facility currently in the UK that allows us to test the new membranes.
Has this come as something of a surprise to you?
It's been going on for about a year, and it's an issue for the whole industry to try and address.
Well, you're the only people in the country that have a desalination plant.
Yes, but the testing facility goes beyond just those membranes. It's any material that comes into contact with water that's being prepared for drinking.
Right. I'll say if you want to pick up, but if we can keep answers tight and focused to outcomes for customers, because this is a problem with the industry as a whole here, but Thames Water in particular. A lot of it gets stuck down in process, but the service for the customers at the end of the day is bad and getting worse. And it is your customers that send members of Parliament to Westminster, and that's why we want to keep the focus on them. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I think we can agree that you are suggesting that you're making solid progress as a report showed recently in those critical areas of performance. But an article in the Financial Times said that Thames came dangerously close to running out of water supplies in the hot summer of 2022. Already, this year is proving to be very dry. What measures are you putting in place to ensure customers have a solid and continuous supply of water? And what are you doing to improve that supply?
We are going through a process of making sure that all of our assets are available and all of the reservoirs are as full as they possibly can be. At the end of March, they were at 94%, and they are about 94% now. And we're trying to top that up more. We're going through all of the water assets we have, including the big London plants and everything in the Thames Valley, to make sure that all critical maintenance is done, so we are prepared as best we can be for a drought event. We have 4 levels of drought preparedness. Typically you're at 0. We have just elevated that to 1, which means that we start to go through the preparedness I've just outlined, and we also start to communicate with our customers about the importance of conserving water. So I think at the moment, from what I can see, we have learnt the lessons from the situation in 2022, and we are doing all that we need to at the moment to prepare for water shortage. And I hope that is not necessary.
And how is that looking going forward, given that as climate change takes effect, the increased demand for water, we'll see that increase in demand. What are you doing to future-proof that supply?
Yes, thank you very much for asking that. So there are 2 very big capital, or 1 very big and a lesser capital project. So we have the biggest reservoir being commissioned and built at the moment. It's not started building yet, Cesro, which will be near Abingdon. We start building that in 2028. It'll come into service in the late 2030s.
Start building it in 2028. We've asked you a question about how you're going to ensure continuity of supply in 2025.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought it was about the future.
Well, the future would be July for a lot of people.
Okay, for this year, we are going through all of our assets and making sure that all the critical maintenance is done, so they will be available over the summer period. So that is the most immediate thing that we can do, including filling reservoirs. So once we have a source of water, we are able to pull it through our assets, prepare it for our customers, and deliver it to our customers.
While you're still losing 56 megatons of water a day.
Yeah, no, we are still, as I said
How
earlier.
confident are you that you'll avoid running out of water this summer?
I'm confident we won't run out of water. I'm not confident yet. I'm not confident that we won't have to restrict usage, because that will depend on what the weather does and what rainfall happens between now and the summer.
Thank you. Helena, you were wanting to...
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to touch on some of the past experiences that customers have found with Southern Water. In 2019, you committed to the regulator Ofwat that you would undertake a series of vital infrastructure projects to prevent storm overflows, to reduce pollution instances, to improve water security, as we've just been talking about. And then in 2023, Adrian, just after you became chairman, a letter was sent to the regulator Ofwat to say that you would not be taking those 100 projects forward. You would actually be delaying them further, and instead the money allocated by Thames Water for those projects was spent on other parts of the business, including paying bonuses and dividends. So, Adrian, how can customers have any confidence in your turnaround plan and in your commitment to improve your infrastructure if in just the recent history you have rowed back on commitments made to the regulator to fix this vital infrastructure and instead spent it on bonuses and dividends?
I come bonuses and dividends in a minute. I'll talk about the decision we took in August 23 to defer this.
That was also to pay some of that money to bonuses and dividends. So the two are linked. So address the two together.
That was not the reason we took that decision. We took that decision because of the funding pressures on the business as a whole. It's true that this business, like many businesses, needs to reward its staff effectively. We are in a competitive marketplace for staff. We do need to reward them competitively. But the amounts of bonuses paid to staff is very small compared with the capital cost of the works that we were considering at that stage. The fact of the matter is, as we've noted on several occasions, Thames in the last year has come very close to running out of money entirely. There were times in the last year when we had 5 weeks liquidity. Now, running a £20 billion corporation on 5 weeks liquidity, honestly, it's hair-raising. And what you were seeing in that decision we took in August 2023 was the start of the process. We felt we needed to conserve cash.
How can customers have any faith that you are committed to turning around the business, you are committed to reducing sewage, pollution incidents, you are committed to reducing water outages, if these 100 vital projects that you committed to the legal regulator you would do in 2019, were rowed back on?
Because, as I say, it was a funding crunch.
Customers have any faith now that what you've committed to do will be done if you row back on these commitments so easily?
It was, I don't think we rowed back on the commitments. We understand that this is work that needs to be done.
Sorry, you just said you don't...
We understand that this is work that needs to be done, and there are many, many calls on the company's cash resources. We are having to prioritise, and we prioritised asset health and the routine expenses of the business in preference to this big capital programme, which will be carried forward into this current AMP and done as the funds become available.
Just to be clear, these 100 projects, they were committed to be done in the 2019 to 24 period. Customers were charged on that basis for these works, but they weren't done. So I think you have rowed back on those commitments.
We have deferred the work. We are still committed to carry out that work, but we can't magic money out of nowhere.
The impact of that deferral...
Our problem is that this business has been under huge funding pressures ever since I joined, and probably before. And we have to prioritise. And we prioritised asset health, getting the existing infrastructure business working more effectively.
You didn't, because these were asset health projects that you deferred.
These are projects designed to improve the asset health, but there are other priorities that we have to fix.
You clearly rowed back on commitments, and the impact of that is clearly seen, as Chris just alluded to. There's been a 40% rise in pollution incidents last year under your watch. Last year, you did make profits of 140 million. So all of this talk about not having the money to do these vital infrastructure projects, I think customers will come to their own conclusions about that.
All I can say and must say is that the cash box was very nearly empty a lot of last year. We were running at one stage on 5 weeks cash. Profit is a different measure. Cash is the only measure that counts. That's what you spend.
So why pay the bonuses and the dividends?
Because we have to keep staff. This is a very competitive marketplace out there. Thames Water has very good staff. Chris has brought together a great team. And if we are unable to pay bonuses, people will come knocking. They'll try to pick out of us the best staff we've got. That is not in customers' interests.
It's very clear you pay very large bonuses to those at the top of your company. The most junior employees in your company, the people out repairing the water leaks on the roads, what percentage bonus did they get last year?
I can't tell you that, I'm afraid. I can write to you afterwards and explain that. But
we have
put in place a system.
Adrian, are you not aware of that figure? Because as the chairman of the company, if you think bonuses are so important to rewarding performance...
This is a structure of bonuses that goes right down through the company. I can't give you the precise figure. I don't know if you've got it, Chris.
Yeah, it goes to the Frontline, and they can earn between 3 and 6% of their salary as a bonus. And for the last 2 years, they have been paid a lump sum because we haven't had the capability to structure it in a way that allows it to be performance related, and that is something that we are fixing at the moment.
So you're awarding bonuses to the lowest paid members of staff of between 3 and 5%?
3 and 6%. Yes.
3 and 6%. And how does that relate to the percentage bonuses paid to the CEO?
My on-target performance is 150, can be 156%.
So what's that? 100 times the bonus, just
It
under
is-
70 times the bonus of the lowest paid staff in the company. Because if the work that they are doing on the front line, repairing mains, repairing leaks, fixing sewers, is so vital, why is the percentage bonus that they receive so much less than what the top leadership of the company receives?
I accept that it is a lot of money, and I accept it's considerably more than the front line, and we try and, I mean, as Adrian has said, we try and offer packages that are competitive in the market so we can attract and retain the people that we need within the business.
It sounds like you're interested in attracting and retaining those at the very top of the company, but those who are the most junior members of staff doing the hard work on the front line are not receiving the same treatment. And I think that discrepancy is very clear for all to see. If you were truly committed to fixing your infrastructure, I think you would have more focus on the morale and the support to those frontline members of staff. I'd now like to ask you about some examples of projects that other members of Parliament have raised with us. We know that last year your customer complaints were up 10%. And in many cases, that was caused by a number of supply interruptions. And there are specific incidents that have been raised with me by other members. In Reading, the member for Reading Central, Matt Rodder, raised an incident where his constituents were left without water over a weekend. Some constituents had no water for up to 4 days. He has been repeatedly writing to Thames Water, repeatedly raising this with Ofwat, because your company is currently refusing to pay any compensation for that incident, arguably against the GSS standards. That doesn't seem like an honest and transparent approach as a company. So can you commit to take that away and look again at that decision?
Very, very much so. If customers were out of supply for more than 12 hours, then automatically compensation kicks in. And I will absolutely commit to taking that away and looking at it and making sure we compensate customers in accordance with the policy that we have agreed with Ofwat.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to do that.
Thank you for that assurance. One of the issues, Chris, is that the company is saying that customers' experience and what they have shared with their Member of Parliament in surveys is not matching what your monitors say. Now, sometimes that can be caused because if there's extremely low pressure, there's no usable supply. But would you commit in this instant to honour the experiences of those customers that they are sharing with their Member of Parliament, rather than bunkering down on this data, which we know from previous performance has often been incorrect? We know Thames Water has a history of sharing incorrect data.
Yeah, I am happy to do that. And where this happened elsewhere, the requirement is at 0.3 bars. We have recently upped that. That's our policy to 1 bar to try and address that issue. So I am happy to commit to that.
Good, thank you. Another area that people have raised with me is often when there is a leak or there is a repair that needs to be done, which everybody understands that work needs to be done, the road is dug up and then it's left for inordinate lengths of time, and quite often appears that nobody's doing any work on that site, but huge delays are being caused, road closures in that time. A number of members have raised that with me. Can you talk us through what your process is for roadworks and how you minimise disruptions to the public?
Yes, and I know that is an area that we're not as good as we could be on it. So there are essentially 2 gangs that work, and it's meant to be a process that allows the gang that makes good to follow on immediately for the gang that has mended the issue. And the process at the moment is not as effective as it should be. But it should happen within 12 hours of the work being done. And that is a metric that we are not meeting all of the time at the moment. And it all depends on the demands on the business. So I accept we don't get that right all of the time. We are very conscious of the chaos and issues it can create, and we are working hard to try and improve the process and get the right level of resource and gangs in place to be able to do that. So, and I'm sorry that it causes inconvenience to customers.
And in some cases, do those sites work overnight?
Oh, yes.
In order to complete it at a time when there's less disruption?
Very much so. I mean, we are an organisation that works 24/7. And that happens most of the time. I mean, if there's an issue, we will be fixing it overnight.
And I think this also relates to the previous conversation we had about bonuses and dividends and the fact that 100 critical projects were delayed and some of that money diverted to bonuses and dividends. And I just wanted to pick up, Adrian, with you on this point. You talked about bonuses. You did not address the fact that some of that money was used to pay dividends, which is something Thames Water has been fined for doing. Can you comment on that?
Yes, certainly. There were 2 dividends, one in October 2023, another in February 2024. The October dividend was paid to keep alive our discussions with the then shareholders about injecting more capital into the company. They told us in terms that we had to continue to pay those dividends to keep alive the prospect of more capital being injected into the company. That's the reason we took that decision, because we believed it was in the interests of customers to try to keep the existing shareholding base and the existing capital structure alive as long as we could. In the event, as you know, that failed. But in October, it was not clear. We were dedicated to trying to get more capital into the company.
And how much was that dividend in October?
157 million, I think, from memory.
Which would have more than covered the 98 projects put back.
But the point is, we needed to keep alive our discussions to bring more capital into the company.
But it didn't work.
Well, we didn't know it was going to work at that time.
Perhaps a better use of that money might have been fixing pipes.
No, that's wrong.
Why
The
is that
problem
wrong?
is, we were in discussion with Ofwat throughout the period I joined in July 2023 till the 31st of March 2024. We were trying to find a basis in discussion with the existing shareholders for them to put substantial billions of new capital into the company. That was a goal worth striving for, because that would have avoided much of what's happened over the last year. And it was for that reason we paid that dividend in October, to ensure that we kept those discussions alive, because the shareholders said, we need these dividends. We need them to pay our debt service at the level of Kemble. We haven't got into the corporate structure. We spent a lot of time on that last time round.
Yeah.
But the point is that this was paid not to the external shareholders. Our external shareholders have not received a penny since 2017. This dividend was an intergroup dividend to allow debt service to be paid at a higher level in the company. It did not go to the shareholders. They have had no money out of the company since 2017.
Well, you've talked through your decision to pay that, and colleagues will come to discussions about this later, but I think customers will draw their own conclusions from this evidence session. A decision was made to defer vital infrastructure projects. We have seen pollution incidents go up in the time since. A more reliable investment of that money may well have been on fixing infrastructure. I just wish to ask you one last question. We have seen huge changes in leadership at Thames Water. One of the reasons you are before us at this committee is because you are one of the more continuity members of Thames Water, having been serving as chair since 2023. As a committee, we have seen many different CEOs, many different CFOs before us. Can you give us a commitment that the team we have in front of us is the team we will have throughout this Parliament?
No.
Please, no.
You can't.
No.
In which case, how...
The reason is that we live in a competitive marketplace and we have to provide the right sort of packages to these people. Otherwise, the headhunters come knocking. And it's not...
Every time we have the Thames Water members in front of this committee, they make assurances about turnaround plans, they make commitments, and then when the next set of
we have to live in the real world.
Adrian.
We have to live in the real world here. No one will give you a commitment that there will be no change in the leadership team over 5 years. It is simply not possible.
Adrian, if you allow me to finish the point, we asked the questions at this committee. We have seen many changes of leadership. At every evidence session, the committee have been made big assurances by that set of leadership. Then at the next evidence session, we have a different set of leadership before us, apologising for the mistakes made under their predecessors. So how can the committee have any faith in the assurances and the commitments that your team are giving us today when we've seen so many changes and so many rowbacks on commitments that we won't simply have a new set of leaders in a couple of years explaining why this turnaround plan failed?
We are the new kids on the block here. This is the team that came in with my arrival in July 2023. We are making progress. all of us believe in the future of Thames Water. We are here to try to put things right. That's the testament of faith we give you. We won't quit until the job is done, but it is not realistic to say there will be no changes in the team over 5 years.
Can I just ask, why would headhunters come to recruit people from a failing company?
It's not a failing company, it's a cover in recovery. We are making progress. This is a good team. You can see how the progress is starting to become apparent. And people go for good teams. It's simply unrealistic to think there will be absolutely no change over 5 years.
A 40% increase in pollution incidents is a mark of success. What does failure look like?
Oh, we must go back into those pollution incidents.
Yeah, I come back to the point, and this is a serious point here, and it is about the experience of your customers.
Yes.
And people enjoying the natural environment. 40% increase in pollution incidents, but still £770,000 paid out in performance bonuses.
Yes.
Why does a water company need performance bonuses? I can see why a merchant bank or a hedge fund or something of that sort might want to reward high risk, but water is not a high risk business.
I have not followed...
It's a sector that's lost its way, isn't it?
I have not watched in detail the discussions you have had with all the other water company chief executives and their supporters, but bonuses are featured in all of them.
Yes, absolutely, and that's why I'm asking you as a sector.
And the fact is that we are in a marketplace for talent. Mm-hmm. Talent goes where it thinks it's going to have the best future. We have a remarkable collection of people here because they are believers. They are believers that we will turn this business around. That's what they get their satisfaction for. But there are limits.
Just quickly, to go back to the other people who work for Thames Water, so the water engineers, the other people, I've just had a quick look on the website and there are numerous roles there, vacant roles. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't the same apply? Because you need those talented people to work on the ground, as well as Helena was saying. Mm-hmm. So why is so much attention paid to the bonuses of the people at the top and not those of people doing the work on the ground when you've got vacancies?
I mean, we do have a lot of vacancies at the moment because we recognise the ramp up in capital that we have to deploy over the next 5 years. So we have about 700 vacancies at the moment that we are advertising for. Some areas are much more difficult to recruit than others. So mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, process controllers, and we are always assessing whether the level of compensation, remuneration that we offer in the market is competitive. And we are finding in many instances at the moment that we are having to pay above market to attract people into Thames Water. That is happening.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to move on to the Price Review 2024. Barry, you're going to lead our questioning in this.
Thank you very much. And could I make a mention of my register of members' interest? Sir Adrian, we've crossed swords before, and
Hasn't discussions before.
Indeed, and I don't want to incur the wrath of the chair. So I'm going to, I've formulated my questions to you in such a way that they don't demand an explanation, they only demand an answer, and usually that answer can be either one word or a very short sentence. So let's...
That's what I can do to apply. At all. That's an example. Fill your boots.
That's why I've tried to do it that way, Chair. The 3 billion of debt funding that you arranged is in 2 tranches of 1.5 billion, is it not?
Yes.
The second tranche is conditional on you putting, or was conditional on you putting in a challenge to the CMA against Ofwat's PR24 price control ruling, wasn't it?
No. I don't believe that's right.
You don't believe that's
I don't believe that's right.
You put your CMA challenge on hold, did you not?
Yes.
Is it still on hold or have you abandoned it?
No, it is still on hold.
Still on hold. And did you put it on hold because the CMA challenge couldn't report back in time to let potential equity investors see the final price control in order to invest or to develop their engineering plan of what they're going to spend and how they're going to deliver it?
No.
So when was PR24 capital investment programme due to start?
At the beginning of this
April
AMP.
2025?
Beginning of this AMP.
April
2025.
The CMA challenge would only have reported back in October, which would have been a 6 months delay. Is that
Probably later than that.
probably later? So even more than a 6 months.
Just a word of explanation, if I may. The CMA has 6 months from the date of its referral, but has liberty to apply for a longer period. And in complex cases, they apply for a longer period, as they did in 2020.
So as I said, the CMA challenge would have put the final adjudication and the final decision on what your investment allowance was back beyond the point at which your future potential equity investors would have wanted to have started the programme, would it not?
I don't think it follows.
Well, it certainly follows if AMP8 was supposed to start in April 2025, and yet you couldn't get investors in if they didn't know how much they were going to be allowed to invest in the company and how much work was going to be agreed to be done with the regulator.
They knew that, as we knew that, on the 17th of December, when the final determination was handed down.
But you were going to appeal it, and you told me that you've put the appeal on hold.
We agreed
in order to challenge termination by Ofwat.
We agreed with Ofwat that in the light of the equity interests we have had, it would be worthwhile the equity holders, the equity bidders, discussing with Ofwat whether there were understandings that could be reached which would allow them to accept that determination.
Let's move on to those understandings.
For us, we had determined it was neither financeable nor investable.
How far behind are you on the investment programme on AMP7, PR19?
I don't think I can answer that. Chris may be able to do that.
We have spent, compared to the allowance that we agreed with Ofwat, an additional 1.7
How far behind are you?
And
on not just AMP7, but also on WINEP7 programme.
I was going to then go to the point that your colleague brought up. We are behind on the WINEP7 project, and that will complete during AMP8. One or two of the larger schemes might even go into AMP9.
Right. So in both, you've said that in time it's behind. In financial terms.
Yeah, it's also more expensive.
Yeah. Okay, so it's going to be more costly because of the delays. And the failure to achieve your ODIs, your outcome delivery incentives, on sewage and leakage, and your MEXIs, the measures of experience, the more penalties you incur, and the more difficult it will be to sucker in new investors. Or, sorry, let's put that another way, the higher interest return that they will demand. Yes?
Yeah. The ODIs in the last AMP were about £500 million.
Now, of course, the same applies to AMP8. So the further behind you fall with the work of AMP8, the more expensive it gets and the more penalties you incur. Is that right?
Correct.
But given AMP8 is at least 2 times the capital work of AMP7, and you've made no attempt to source the additional contractors that you will need, this means you've only re-engaged the existing contractors. This means your ability to press on with AMP8 is constrained, and in this first year of AMP8, you probably only just be completing AMP7, won't you?
I don't agree with all of that. We are ramping up capital expenditure quite significantly, and in the last year, capital expenditure is up on the year before by 38%, so quite considerably. I accept we are behind where we would like to be in AMP8, and we are going through a process of improving our capital governance so we can invest more for the benefit of our customers and the environment.
But your problem is that because you are behind in both AMP7 and AMP8, you are incurring additional penalties. You've just said 500 million hangover from last year in AMP7. and that means that it's going to become even more expensive to get the capital in and to persuade investors to come in, because they see that the further you fall behind, the more problems you have with penalties.
I agree with that. So the final determination was about 20 billion. We felt that we needed to spend a lot more than that, getting on towards 24 billion, and that our performance would not be what was demanded by our regulator, and that leads to the penalties increasing in AMP8 as you suggested. And that is an issue for incoming shareholders and for our creditors.
Absolutely. The Environment Agency has also said that it will significantly increase its inspection and enforcement regime on Thames Water. What amount has Thames internally estimated that this might cost? Maybe this is one for Mr. Buck. Made an internal assessment of that, so what is it?
I don't have that information to hand.
Have you made an internal assessment?
The additional cost of the inspections?
The additional cost that you're factoring in will come from the fines the Environment Agency levies against you for those additional inspections that they have promised to fulfil.
In terms of our future financial planning, I've factored in the additional investment costs that Chris has referred to, the extra 4 billion. I've factored in an extra 900 million for the ODI penalties in AMP8.
And there has been an assessment done of the penalties that may arise from what the EA has done. And
I was asking.
And we have made that available.
And how much is that assessment of the additional penalties from the EA?
And forgive me, I will have to come back to
Okay,
that.
if you can write to us on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. The revised regulatory business plan that you are developing requires a reduction in penalties from Ofwat, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The aim is to be able to deliver the performance that we agree within the allowances that Ofwat gives us, but it is going to take many years to get to that point.
If Ofwat refused to reduce those penalties, is the equity investment still on the table from KKR?
Well, that will be a decision for KKR, but as you have pointed out, it is much more difficult for an investor to come in being very aware of those penalties. It will go to the return.
So if not, will it be too late to go back to the other potential investors that you've excluded from the process, or would it result in a special administration regime?
It's a very fluid situation, but those both are possibilities.
Are they?
I think if we...
Are the other investors still there? Are they still keen and showing interest?
Apologies, it will depend on the time frame that you are looking at. If the current process fails, well, first of all, you have to consider what the creditors may or may not do, because they may step in and do a debt for equity swap and restructure the balance sheet. We would probably go back into a CMA process that would run, and there is no guarantee that we would not stay on a market-led solution as opposed to a special administration. But it is a very fluid situation, and those are all possibilities.
When KKR were bidding, they claimed that because of their size, I think that's £638 billion, they boasted that they could bully the Treasury into stopping Ofwat and the EA from imposing the penalties and fines. Is that why you chose them as your preferred bidder?
No, certainly not.
You recognise that was a claim that they did make?
I don't recognise the quote, and I don't support the sentiment.
But it's a strategic choice that you made to keep KKR as the only show in town.
Indeed.
Sorry, Barry.
In every bidding situation, at some stage or other, you have to go down to a single bidder. And that's when you're in sight.
The point at which you chose, though, you still had the option of keeping other live options, and you chose not to take it. So the consequences that flow from
in
that...
practical terms, have that option, sir. The work that KKR is doing to move from preferred bidder status to a complete contract is extraordinary.
Look,
I've got.
paying for it. I mean,
We have got a limited amount of resource. We have got a limited amount of resource.
you are paying for all the work that KKR want. I mean, let's not try and bluff.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting we
Okay.
are not doing so. I'm just pointing out that they are posing immense demands on the business.
Let's get back to the point that the chair and I were in the process of making, and that is that you chose to eliminate those others from the bid. Now, in response to the chair, what you said was, there comes a point when you've got to do this, and it was the right thing to do, those bids fell away. Yet we've heard from Mr. Weston that actually we might be having to go back to looking at those bids, and at the time, Ofwat and the market looked at what you were doing and said, well, why are you doing this so early? So what we're trying to get at is, why did you do it so early?
Well, I think we need to go back a little bit in time.
Oh, no, not another explanation. Come on, just answers.
You're asking me, and I'm giving you an explanation. And the explanation is that this was part of a long-running process which looked at eventually 6 bids. 2 of those bids fell out of contention pretty quickly, but we were left with 4 bids. And we conducted a detailed evaluation of all of those bids. And I can tell you that the KKR bid was by far and away the best. Technically, financially, in terms of the commitment to provide equity, they were ahead. And so, conscious of the need to create a disciplined process towards completion, we chose KKR. Now, it is true that KKR said, we're only going to do this if we're the only person in the field. And we agreed with that. We agreed with that because we could not have handled more than one.
You didn't choose KKR because they could bully the Treasury. So did you choose KKR because they committed to giving the senior debt holders less of a haircut?
No. No? I think that the...
They did, didn't they? They did it to saying that.
They committed...
We are going to come to this later on in the session, Barry.
Okay. Look, investors would normally want to see the board structure as well as the investment structure of the company, but you've said that the entire board will step down, that is, as soon as the new investment goes in. Is that because the Court of Appeal removed immunity from Thames directors against any claims a future special administration regime might bring?
No.
Why was it?
I was what? I was what, Mr. Gardner?
Why have you said that the whole board would step down?
Because when you'd have it...
When you were answering my colleague, you said that you couldn't give an assurance that they would stay in place, but you didn't say, I can give you an assurance that they will not be in place over the next 5 years.
Because your colleague was discussing...
We have already said that we will all step.
Look, Mr. Gardner, your colleague was discussing the executive team, and I was referring to the executive team. If you're talking about the board, then it is true that when you have a change of control of a big company like this, you have to expect there will be huge changes in the board. One or two, and it may be that the new equity owners will want some people to stay, but the expectation is that a majority will step down.
Why didn't you say that to my colleague?
Because she was talking about the executive team.
No. She was talking about the board as well. You know
She was
that.
talking about the executive.
Specifically about you 3.
No, she didn't. She talked about the executive team.
I'm sure Hansard will tell us who's right. Thank you, Chair.
Are we done? Thank you. Move on then. Sorry. No, I will move on to the question around the securing of the emergency funding. We've touched on some of this already, but Tim, you're going to lead us on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I ask about the £3 billion loan from your Class A bondholders, including Elliott Partners and Silver Point? We've had a note from your Class B creditors, you won't be surprised to hear, who described it as a payday loan style arrangement. Can I ask, Chris, perhaps you for your assessment of the loan and its risks potentially to the future viability of Thames?
Certainly. I think you also have to consider how it came about and the timing of it. We started talking to the creditors as a whole in July last year. We had to come to an agreement by the 25th of October, and coming up to that time, the A's and B's were working together. On the 22nd of October, we had an approach from the Bs entirely separate from the As, and that was a surprise to us. And given the deadline was the 25th, and there was no certainty that the Bs could deliver what they were suggesting, then we went with the outcome, the As, that were most certain to give us the firm financial foundation that we needed. Anything that the Bs proposed had to be agreed by the As, and I could see no prospect of that happening.
So the reason why you went with the A proposition is because you couldn't see an agreement, because the difference between the two offers was quite substantial, wasn't it? Because the A's offered an interest rate of 9.75% and the B's offered an alternative at 8%, which would have saved potentially £375 million.
Yeah, I mean, each it'll be put forward by each of them. I don't think the difference was as stark as you suggest. And I go back to, we had absolutely no confidence that the Bs would be able to deliver what they proposed. And it just came in too late, and we were working to a liquidity runway that demanded action be taken by the 25th of October. And we had spent months negotiating it with the A's. It takes a long time with a lot of paperwork to get the certainty you needed. And that we just could not have done it with the B's.
That wasn't the assessment of everybody at Thames, was it? Because actually there were members of the board who thought the B's offer was better. That was reported in the Financial Times.
Financial Times, with respect, was not in the boardroom. I was in the boardroom. Everyone was united in dismissing the B's offer.
And that was on the principle that that was a solid offer that you needed immediately, whereas the other offer, which was a lower interest rate, there was no certainty of it being accepted.
Yes, I think we've talked a little bit about the pressures on liquidity already today. We were concerned that we might run out of liquidity in December unless we pressed on with the A's offer.
We're talking about alternatives. The High Court suggested you might have found better terms in the market from new funders. What's your assessment of that?
I mean, we were in a very difficult situation. I have seen absolutely no evidence that there was any funding from elsewhere on better terms, and I would have been very surprised if we'd found it.
So the terms that you did agree to in the end, again, the Class B creditors have suggested there are hidden terms and conditions. Can you talk a little bit about what they might be referring to?
I'm afraid I don't know what.
Are there any hidden conditions to
I mean, bear in mind that there was an extraordinary amount of disclosure in the court proceedings, thousands and thousands of pages of document. We are not aware of any hidden terms.
Was this at the point where you had 5 weeks left of liquidity that you were talking about earlier? Yeah. Does the deal include any financial retention incentives for executives at Thames?
The deal required us to put in place a retention plan for a limited number of senior executives.
Can you give us an idea of what those incentives might be?
Well, we have created incentives to try to retain really our most precious resource, which is the senior management team. So we have a bonus paid in completion of the first restructuring plan, another one at the end of the second restructuring plan, and then a large amount right at the end of the process next year.
And what sort of size are these bonuses?
Well, in the case of the first two instalments, it's 50% of salary.
So very substantial, bonuses. Because I suppose
I think it's fair to say, to be honest, this is the first time I've encountered this. I've done a few reconstructions in my time, and I don't think we'd have got there but for the fact that the lenders insisted that it should be so.
I'm just thinking, a layperson looking at this will see that there was an offer from the A's at 9.75% that came with financial incentives to retain people, and there was an offer from the B's at a lower interest rate. And there might be some scepticism or a suggestion that one offer was gone with for other reasons. What would you say to that?
I would say that will be inappropriate at that conclusion. I mean, the team was working astonishingly hard. We've talked a little bit about the vital importance of keeping the team. I think my answer to Ms. Dollymore, we were trying to emphasise the importance of the team. We need this team to stay until the completion of the transaction.
The Class A offer involves an incentive scheme for executives that could be worth up to £1 million for yourself, I suggest, Chris. Is that correct?
At the moment, I am not part of that scheme.
Okay. It would be up to £1 million for some executives.
It's a large amount of money, certainly.
Customers will find that extraordinary in view of
Well, customers
earlier
should also take into account that they will pay none of that amount. This is an amount which we're funded by the lenders and at the end of the day borne by the lenders, because we wanted to isolate this scheme from the general run of customers. It is the lenders who attach so much importance to the completion of these transactions, and they are paying for the privilege.
Can we talk a bit about the time pressure? We've just talked about the 5 weeks liquidity. The Class B group said that the loan took advantage of the time pressure Thames is under. So is the urgency, was it solely about liquidity that drove the deal?
I think that's right. We have had very, very tight liquidity at a number of points over the last 9 months. So in October, we needed to complete a change to the agreements to release some reserves and get to the start point for the reconstruction plan. We had about 5 weeks liquidity at that time. When we were in the High Court and the Court of Appeal, liquidity was also very, very tight. I mean, we are talking about a huge corporation, 8,000 employees. Having 5 weeks liquidity is a nightmare.
Urgency will worsen the conditions that you will have got from lenders, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't think it worsens it. They are tough conditions. I wouldn't pretend otherwise. They're tough conditions. But we were in a sort of beggars can't be choosers situation. We were running along the edge of the precipice, and we had to secure the financial future of the company.
Could I also just add that that liquidity runway was short, but it did allow us to carry on investing as we needed to, the capital investments to meet legal, regulatory and environmental obligations. So as the creditors came in and became more engaged, they recognised the importance of doing that. They didn't constrain us in cash and constrain that investment. And that could have been an option and would normally be an option in that situation, but wasn't. And that is what also constrained the runway.
Thank you, Chair.
Just to go back very briefly to the question of financial retention incentives in the Class A. Who pays these?
The lenders pay.
I'm sorry?
The lenders pay.
The lenders will pay these.
We have set up, we know this is a sensitive point, so we have set up an auditable process which traces the money that are paid in these incentives back to the lenders. And they get funded out of our new facilities, and those facilities will not be repaid by customers.
And that won't be recycled through some other process to come out of customers' pockets. Okay. We're going to move on to the court proceedings. Barry, you want to lead questions on this?
Thank you. Yeah. Before we do, Chair, you said that you'd seen no evidence that you could have sourced additional funding on better terms from anywhere else. I believe in early September, Mr. Weston, there was an offer that you received from one of the groups that eventually put a bid in of £1 billion, which was on better terms, wasn't it?
I mean, I'll have to come back to you on that. There were offers that came in. The substance to them was often debatable, and certainly we as a team felt that the A's, with the certainty they provided and the proportion of the creditor base that they spoke for, was an important factor in any decision-making process. But the particular one that you're referring to, I would have to come back to you on.
You know the one I am referring to, do you?
Not particularly, no.
The Class A bondholders argued that there was insufficient time to implement an alternative restructuring plan if the A plan couldn't be implemented. Yeah? And the Court of Appeal described the enormous time pressure of the case as unacceptable and requests to expedite the appeal proceedings as, I quote, frankly ridiculous. To what extent did time limitations force the court's hand?
I don't think the court would ever be in a position of allowing its hand to be forced. I mean, they are very professional in their approach. I mean, the judgment at first instance ran to 176 pages. They looked minutely at every aspect of the plan, and it was extraordinary performance.
What you were putting on was unacceptable.
Well,
were you intentionally trying to?
Clearly not, Mr. Clearly not. Clearly not. We are in a position where we are very tight on liquidity. We're working all hours at God's end to try to finalise a package to allow us to start those court proceedings. We started, this whole process goes back to when the existing shareholders decided not to provide further capital to the company. As soon as that happened, we had our backs to the wall. We started a twin-track process of trying to find equity and trying to bring the lenders together to, in the first instance, provide this extra liquidity. It was a very close-run thing.
What impact would a SAR have on Thames Water's operations and on the senior staff?
I think that a SAR would be make life extremely difficult for everyone. We think that the suppliers would wonder how long they wanted to continue working for Thames, because obviously the future would be in doubt. We think the same will be true of the senior staff. Who knows what the outcome will be if we went into SAR. They would be receptive, we think, to offers from elsewhere. We think the burden on the government will be considerable. At the court of first instance, the expert said that he thought it would amount to about another 5 billion of cost for the government. I think I have that figure right. So wherever you look, there's additional strain on the process. The government would have to finance this programme because there will be no other liquidity available. That's what happened in Railtrack, if you remember. I don't know whether we share that experience. We probably do. And the government would seek to recoup that amount, we guess, by having to sell the business to someone else. But many months later...
The new the Water Special Measures Bill, they have the right to recover that and to make sure it's not the public that's paying the bill.
Yeah.
The High Court judge said that he might have refused to sanction the plan from the outset if the, quote again, eye-watering level and of the advisor's fees had been clear up front. Why were those costs so high, and how much have you spent on legal costs to date?
I think the costs reflect the magnitude of the restructuring that is underway. It is the largest restructuring of a balance sheet, I think, in British history. And I think the costs reflect that and the number of parties involved. The costs incurred are extremely high. And I think that just reflects what I have just outlined. And to date, over the last 12 months, it's about £159 million.
Why do you think the judge said that he might have refused to sanction the plan from the outset if he'd known those costs were so high?
I think what he perhaps would have wanted was an explanation of why those costs were so high.
No, I don't think he did. Because, as you say, Sir Adrian, he had perused all the data by this stage, and then he came to a conclusion that actually he would not have gone down that road had he realised that at the beginning. That's what he
might not have gone down that road. Might not have gone down that road.
I don't know why the judge, what he was thinking behind
statement from Master of the Rules.
But yes, I think it was a remarkable statement. And I think that it would have been necessary to explore the consequences of not endorsing the plan.
Well, it rather suggests that he believed that so much money that could have been being spent in, let's call it, more productive ways, directly addressing the concerns that my...
This is a judge who's highly experienced in the area. This is not somebody who spent his life doing criminal legal aid. You have to accept that when he says that it's eye-watering, then something has generally caused eyes to water here.
We agree that
would have caused him
Yeah, and it would have,
The
to
plan.
that extent,
We agree that there are eye-watering costs.
Sir.
Sorry.
we should be careful about talking about judges, obviously.
What was the
My
purpose
bad.
of the civil immunity clause in the original loan agreement?
I'm sorry, you'll have to explain that. I don't understand the question.
In the original loan agreement, there was a civil immunity clause. Why? You have to write to us on that one also.
Again?
You have to write to us on that one also.
We're going to have
Yes, I think we will have to.
Okay, Jane, you've been very patient. Ownership of the company.
Yes, I'm going to ask about ownership. I wasn't here on the last committee, so I know that you did deal with this with the last committee, but if you could just kind of go through the structure a little bit with me. You did say last time, I think, Sir Adrian, that you would love to simplify the opaque and complex structure, but I'm looking at it now and it seems that we have the external shareholders, Kemble Water Holdings, Kemble Water Euro Bond, and then Kemble Water Finance and Thames Water Kemble Finance, which together hold
Awful.
18 billion of gross debt, it said here. And then Thames Water underneath, we have Thames Water Utilities, Thames Water Utilities Finance and Thames Water Utilities Holdings that have 14.7 billion of debt held. Have I got that right so far?
More or less. More or less. Can I try to simplify it? Would that be helpful?
Yes.
I think there are.
One of the points that was made, I think, at the last hearing was that you were the chair of the board for Kemble as well.
Briefly.
Yeah, as Thames Water, and you stepped down. Why did you step down? I mean, I know there were issues pointed out that there was a conflict there because of the debt. Is that why you stepped down?
No, I mean, when I took over at Thames, there was some difficulty in relationships between the Thames board and the shareholders. The shareholders were having lots of discussions with Ofwat, to which the Thames board was not privy. And I explained to Ofwat, I discussed this with Ofwat before I took either appointment, and I said to them, for a period of time, I need to chair both boards in order to bring them together, in order to stamp out any lack of coordination between the boards. So that's what I did. We used to have combined board meetings with the shareholders and the Thames board taking decisions, each taking separate decisions on the matters that affected them, but with a good degree of coordination between them. Now, it was always right that there was potential for a theoretical conflict of interest.
Yes, because Thames pays dividends. It didn't pay dividends to shareholders, but it paid dividends to Kemble, didn't it?
Let me come back to dividends, because I think it's a decent point there. It was clear to me in February 2024, that this was heading for an impasse, and where the future of Thames needed to be divorced from the future of Kemble. That's the reason why I stepped down from Kemble at that stage. If you go back to dividends, I think it was one of the instances we had identified with Ofwat that there might have been a conflict. And so when it came to the October dividend, which we've already discussed, I did what the governance textbook tells you to do. I wrote to the directors of both boards and I said, if there is a potential conflict here, would you like me to step down? Would you like me to recuse myself from the discussion? And you can both discuss it, free of any potential conflict that I might have had. And all of them said, we trust your objectivity, please carry on. So I did.
Ofwat changed the rules, didn't they, about the dividends? So Thames could no longer pay dividends to Kemble, and then they defaulted on that loan, the £400 million loan, in April 2024. What impact did that then have on Thames?
Well, I think it started the process, which we're now in the late stages of. You see, I mean, when I was here in December 23, I pointed out, I think in response to a question from my learned friend up there, that there was a risk that the loan would go into default, and that would deter the shareholders from putting new equity into Thames, into Kemble. And that's actually what happened.
We lost our investment grade, and when that happened, it became a licence breach, and that then meant that we couldn't distribute any funds outside the regulated entity.
And the FT has stated that the current shareholders now basically are divorced from the company. They have no kind of skin in the game and no motivation to act, to provide any kind of oversight to the board. Do you agree with that? And if so, then who's controlling the board?
Well, it is true that once we got to the 31st of March last year, the shareholders effectively abandoned Thames.
Yeah.
They took their representatives off the board, so the board was slightly marooned. And it was that withdrawal that started the process of recapitalisation and debt support that we're now going through. The board is really a custodian of Thames for its future owners. We are working astonishingly hard. I mean, in the first of those years, 2023 to 24, we had 37 board meetings. In the last year, we've had 59 board meetings. So that we are absolutely glued to what happens day by day. And it's the board that is in control of this process. I mean, we have discussions with the lenders, but they are not members of the board.
I mean,
we do not have them at board meetings.
Your general counsel accepted at the hearing that the Class A creditors are basically now the economic owners of the company.
Yes, I think that's correct.
So would you say that they essentially control the company?
No, the board is in control of what happens in the company. I mean, we have representations from the A creditors. We listen to them. It's quite difficult to take an entirely different course from what they want us to do, but it is the board that controls the company. I think that's very important.
It's just, I think the FT reported that in the potential sale to KKR, that those bondholders may end up with quite a substantial stake.
Possibly.
Is that the case?
I think that's a matter for discussion between KKR and the bondholders.
That does make it look like there's a conflict then, if they're the ones basically invested in and essentially economically controlling the company, and they're going to end up with a large stake if this deal goes through. It's just, as Barry was saying earlier, it rings alarm bells.
Yes, I'm not sure there is reason for any alarm bells to ring, because, we have an independent group of creditors. I mean, they are the leading...
Creditors played any role in the process of the preferred bidder process?
No, that was considered by a special committee of the board, because...
No discussion at all with the creditors?
We've had a brief discussion with them, but the evaluation was conducted by Rothschilds on behalf of the board. We took Rothschilds through the evaluation. We've had 6 or 7 meetings of the special committee we established, and it was that committee that decided on the preferred bidder.
Surely, the views of the Class A creditors must have informed that decision.
The Class A creditors were scrupulous in not trying to influence that decision.
Your special committee wasn't looking over its shoulder asking what are they going to do?
Because there were
we
other
asked the
bidders,
creditors for their input.
And this comes back to our earlier questioning about the decision that you took to leave KKR as the sole show in town.
Yes.
I mean, just because this is quite a remarkable state of affairs. Normally, your standard corporate governance, you have your board who are accountable to your shareholders.
Yes.
The shareholders have written you off, they've taken their people off the board, so you no longer have that. So the board manages the company without actually controlling it. The control is vested in the creditors now. I think you've agreed that.
I think we'll have to define our terms a little. I think what Ms. Kirkham said was that the creditors are the economic owners of the company. I believe that's correct, because we at the moment have no equity. The shareholders have written off their equity.
To whom are they accountable? Because they're not accountable to the shareholders of the company, because you've got no shareholders.
We will have an accountability as soon as we get through this process. and have a new equity shareholder.
Were the bidders aware? Sorry,
How can we create more accountability than the circumstances allow us?
were the board aware that the bondholders were, the Class A bondholders were being offered this large stake? And were the board aware whether any of the other bidders were doing something similar?
The terms that we had from at least the leading bidders indicated that they expected discussions to take place with all creditors to invite them to take part in the recapitalisation of the company. Now, there was no detail because things had not advanced to that stage, but that is what will be discussed between KKR and the Class A creditors as we move forward. It's just too early in the process.
Okay. Sarah, we're going to come on to next steps and ownership while we try and compute some of that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so we're looking forward on all of this because it is clearly very complicated for everyone to manage. So as I understand, you've got this emergency loan for liquidity, but obviously we need to sort out the long term. And I understood that Thames Water hoped to secure new ownership by June. So are you on track for that?
There is a clear process that we're working to. So both the creditors and KKR are pulling together a business plan which includes the turnaround of Thames, largely based on management's plan. That will be complete by the end of this month. Yeah. And then during June, there will be discussions with Ofwat and the EA about any flexibility in the final determination, so that KKR and the creditors can understand that, and that will inform both the shape of the balance sheet, the extent of the write-off, and the returns that they will get. That process is due to run until the end of June. I think the process, well, I know the process, if it's agreed between creditors and KKR, will require a second restructuring plan, so it will have to go through the courts, and that won't happen until the autumn. So the deal is not likely to complete until after that.
And if all that goes wrong and that doesn't go to plan, what's the backup and what's the timing for that then? So
if agreement cannot be reached in June, then a decision will have to be made as to whether we are referred to the CMA. So it's deferred at the moment, not withdrawn, and we would have to decide whether we go to the CMA and then join in the CMA process. I'm assuming KKR at that instance, as we're talking about a situation that has failed, the creditors would have to decide what they wanted to do. Do they want to pursue a debt for equity swap or not? And if all of that fails, then SAR is still a possibility.
Okay. And just because Ofwat had also recommended, though, that all along this time that you would continue, basically, along KKR, that you would continue talking to the other sort of parties that have come in, why did you not continue to do that despite
We're not talking to anyone but KKR at the moment.
Right, okay.
And to clear up any misconceptions, I'm not suggesting that any of the other interested parties would come back. But it is a possibility at some point in the future. If we went into a SAR, I don't know how long we would be in a SAR for. I worry it would be a long time and it would have an impact on the company. To come out of SAR, we would still have to go through an equity process, and we would still have to go through a process of agreeing with the creditors what the shape of the balance sheet looked like, and any incoming equity would also have to talk to Ofwat about the regulatory environment that we operate in.
Yes, because I understand that some of the other offers that were sort of been put forward, that they were actually asking about significant sort of credit haircuts, and then they're obviously talking about their debt for equity swap. Had you talked to Ofwat or the other regulators about that? Have you discussed that at this time?
Oh yeah, I've had discussions with Ofwat and David Black that there is a need for absolutely a need for restructuring the balance sheet. It also goes to the regulatory regime that we operate in, and as I made the point earlier, just to extend that a little bit, one of the reasons that we referred the final determination to the CMA was because the FD does not allow for the turnaround of the company. And I feared that without that being recognised in the FD, we might restructure the balance sheet and end up back where we are now in 5 years' time. And none of us want that to happen. So discussing with the regulator the concept of a turnaround regime that might provide some relief from the normal regulatory environment while a company recovers its operations, I think that is an absolute imperative for Thames. Otherwise, we will not be invested in.
No. And if you do actually go down this element of the senior creditors wanting to do this debt for equity swaps, and if that is a real possibility, as you said, are you happy about a distressed debt specialist taking ownership of a regulated water company?
Well, I think that the most important thing is we restructure the balance sheet and we get gearing down to where it needs to be and we get a fresh injection of equity. The types of numbers we are talking about are 15 billion with new equity, that kind of order. I can't guarantee that number, but that kind of order. It's a lot of money. We operate a debt book that is traded. The creditor group is a very broad institution, and I know headlines are grabbed by some members, but it covers banks, insurance companies, pension funds. It's a very broad church of institutions that are in our creditor base that could end up in a debt for equity being on our shareholder register.
Just in terms of that feature, when you talk about the gearing, because I think you mentioned earlier on that you think actually you're at around about 88%, and I know that Ofwat, they always say that a company over 70% is in distress. What's your aim? What's the target gearing figure that you're ultimately going for?
I think the number that Ofwat are seeking is something between 55 and 65%.
And is that's your game?
I think that would be a very good outcome if we were somewhere within that range.
And what sort of time frame are you working to? Because obviously,
so when the deal will only complete when it's inked,
Yep.
and it would reflect that type of structure. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be party to those discussions. It will be between creditors and KKR, and Ofwat will be involved. But that, I think, it would be a very workable range. And then you have to make sure that the performance of the company and the regulatory environment that it's operating in doesn't lead to a deterioration over the next 5 to 10 years that sees the company back in the same place.
Could I just make a comment on gearing? Would you mind me to add something to that? Which is that so Ofwat in their determinations assume 55%. What we do see is that we need to get an investment grade rating. We don't have that today, but we must get that. It's a mandatory requirement of our licence. It is. I think that will be in the range of 60. As Chris said, the sort of range that Chris was talking about, 60, 65. You might better get away a bit higher, but actually, what that is conditional on, though, is how much downside risk is perceived to exist in the business. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the downside risk that we've had in the past, we've had to overinvest. It hasn't delivered what we wanted to, and therefore we've continued to incur penalties. So if you go from AMP6, the overinvestment penalties, in AMP7 the overinvestment got bigger and the penalties got bigger, and our forward look is it gets even worse in AMP8. So part of that will be around what is the turnaround regime that will be agreed to give effectively the safety of that recovery.
Barry, do you want?
Mr. Buck, when I asked you specifically about that earlier, you seemed to not be sure whether you had quantified it, but you now say you know it will be even bigger in AMP8. Have you quantified it, and how much?
So I didn't quite understand the question I didn't hear it properly. So, but when you restated it, you asked me about the penalties. I do have a quantification of that. That is that 900 million downside that is an estimate of what the AMP8 position will look like after investing an additional 4 billion over and above what's in the determination.
Thank you.
And just sorry, can I add to that? Sorry, that's the 900 million penalties from ODIs, but then there could be environmental penalties from the EA.
And they are fines rather than penalties.
Yeah, and we have done an estimation of that, and I said we would come back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. What do you actually mean by a turnaround regime? Because you've used that phrase a number of times now. Is effectively that you managed to persuade Ofwat not to require the payments of those ODI penalties. No, that's what a turnaround regime looks like for you.
Yeah, I might characterise it slightly differently, and I'm sorry. I do think that we need to recognise the reality of Thames and I would argue other water companies, as entities and where they are in their cost base and their operating performance. And I believe there is no point in continually penalising someone if it's going to exacerbate the situation. And it's in everyone's interest that we restructure the balance sheet and we continue to improve the performance of Thames Water. And although we might not be meeting Ofwat's targets, we are generally improving performance year on year. And I think we need to recognise that and then rebase things, reset things to allow the company to continue to recover.
Let me give you another way of looking at that. What you've outlined is that, look, Ofwat, if you decide that we don't have to pay these penalties, then we can work our way to becoming the company that you've outlined you want to be. What about you saying to Ofwat, look, Ofwat, allow us to raise more funds and invest more funds up front, give us the capacity to do that, and then we won't end up needing to pay those penalties. We'd rather do it the other way around. We'd rather be proactive in stopping getting the penalties by putting that investment up front. But the investment framework that you've given us in PR24 wouldn't allow us to do that at the moment.
Wouldn't allow or would allow, sorry. Wouldn't allow. So the framework, I don't think, allows us to do that. And I think it is
It doesn't allow you to get out of doing the penalties either. So one way or another, you've got to sort it out if if Thames Water is going to become a viable and investable proposition.
Yeah.
You have to sort it out one way or the other. You either have to stop doing the things that are incurring the penalties, which are making your costs of capital so much higher, or you've got to get Ofwat to allow you to make that investment up front so you're not incurring the penalties.
We need to do both those things. We need to do the investment, and that has to be enabled by Ofwat, and we have to be in a situation where we can attract that investment from international investors who have a choice to invest not only in the water industry, but other utility industries and elsewhere in the world. So we have to create the conditions that give them the confidence that they can earn a return when they invest in Thames, and we can put the necessary investment in place to fix the operations of the company. And they are not going to do that if they think that there will be penalties that detract from it, that do not reflect the true situation of the company.
Which brings us, Barry, can we keep this tight?
One last thing, and this would be to Sir Adrian. Wasn't that the reason that Thames withdrew from the CMA process? Because there's no way that the CMA could agree to what we've just outlined, given that they have to operate fairly between all the water companies, and they could not argue for the special position that you believe is necessary.
No, that was not what.
Why did you? Why did you put it on hold?
Because in agreement with Ofwat, they felt that there was a chance that we could avoid the huge expense and delay of a CMA reference in getting understandings between the bidders and Ofwat as to how they were going to apply the regime going forward.
That's what you denied before when I asked you about KKR saying that they could bully the Treasury into bullying Ofwat.
Beginning to sound like one of these cartoons where you see Bugs Bunny laying the track as the train follows on behind them.
But what I disagreed with was the characterisation of discussions of anyone trying to bully the Treasury. I used to be in the Treasury. Treasury is completely immune to these sort of entreaties.
Well, in other areas of the committee's work, we'll be happy to take consultancy on how to bully Treasury. Josh.
Thank you, Chair. I think we'd like to return to this discussion around KKR. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about it this morning, but I think there's still some clarity that we need to get. So, KKR obviously have been designated as the sole bidder effectively. Is that because KKR offered senior bondholders a smaller haircut, so in other words, they're offering them a bigger stake in the company?
the process of deciding how much of a haircut the senior creditors will take will be decided between the creditors and KKR going forward. It was one of the evaluation criteria. It was not the major evaluation criteria. Major evaluation criteria is, would KKR be a good shareholder, a good owner of this company?
Okay. Well, on that point, we understand that CKI, they were an alternative bidder. They were expecting a far bigger haircut because they wanted to reflect the extremely strained state of the business. So is this really about getting a new owner that understands the state of Thames Water, or is it about making sure that everybody who's got a stake in the business can get as much out of it as possible?
I think CKI have experience in the water industry. KKR have experience in the water industry. It is a 25% holder. The CKI is 75% in Northumberland Water, and KKR used to own 100% of a small water company. So they are as equipped as anybody to take ownership of Thames, and they have been going about it in the most professional way.
Okay, I'd like to come back to that in a second, but Sir Adrian, you acknowledged earlier that Thames is funding some or possibly all of KKR's due diligence costs. Are your customers footing the bill for that?
No.
Okay.
It is funded through our super senior facility, which will be consolidated in the reorganisation of the balance sheet that we're expecting as part of the second restructuring plan, but the customers do not pay it.
Right, okay, thank you for that clarity. Recently, the peer and accountant Lord Sicker told the Lords that KKR's business model is profiteering, high leverage, low investment, asset stripping and high cash extraction. As you mentioned, KKR previously owned South Staffs Water, which is my local water company, for 5 years. Now, that description from Lord Sicker smacks of what we saw under Macquarie's ownership of your company. And that, to me, begs the question, what potential risks does KKR's ownership actually pose to Thames Water?
Well, it's very difficult dealing with unsubstantiated, blistering attacks of that sort, because we are each sort of prisoner of our own conceptions. I tend to think that KKR is a responsible bidder. We've been through their due diligence very minutely. They are demonstrating a great deal of understanding of water companies. And I think their bona fides can partly be attested by the fact that they have explicitly said they do not intend to take a dividend out of Thames Water until the completion of the reconstruction programme sometime in the early 2030s. I think that is testament of good faith.
Really, for a company like KKR, the size that they are, the way they operate, taking dividends out is small fry, really. They're looking for the sale price at the end of their ownership period. Yeah. And they, sometimes these things are shrouded in mystery, but it's pretty clear publicly that KKR expect to make a profit selling Thames in 7 to 10 years. Where is that added value going to come from, given all of the pressures?
The added value is going to come from the fact that they will be a prime mover in the reconstruction of Thames, the achievement of what needs to be happen to make sure that our operating performance comes up to scratch.
Thames is clearly a company that needs long-term stability and stewardship through, as you said, what's going to be a very difficult period. And yet it's clear that KKR will be in it for a quick return and a quick exit. Is that really the right approach? To me, that seems reckless.
I don't think you can take that for granted. I mean, as I said, I think we're each prisoner to our own perceptions. Our perception is that they will be responsible owners. They are in it for the long term. At some stage or other, they may realise their investment, but they have, I think, said that they believe that a listing will be the right way forward, which would return Thames to the listed sector. I think you will find that Ofwat believe that governments in the listed sector is at a higher standard than in the unlisted sector. I might debate that point, but that's certainly what Ofwat believe. So that KKR are positioning themselves to help the business improve itself, to get back on track with our operating performance, not to take a dividend until the year 30s. There's no imminent suggestion of realisation. I think that will be completely inappropriate. But the public markets seem to be a more attractive way of realising investment in due course than private equity.
But the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour, right? And KKR have got a long history of, as I said, quick exit from companies to make a
I can
profit.
see a hearing with the committee in due course with KKR as its principal witness, so I don't want to deprive you of that opportunity. But I think you've got to bear in mind that there's a big difference on the spectrum between private equity investing and infrastructure investing. This is coming out of a long-term infrastructure fund. I haven't looked minutely into the realisations in the fund, but they are long-term holds designed to improve the businesses, and that's what we're after in KKR's money.
Okay, you mentioned Ofwat there, that they might be look more favourably on listing, but they have also said that they are concerned that there is only one bidder left in this process, that there's no ongoing competition. Do you have any comments to make on that? You've kind of effectively ruled everybody else out very early on in the process.
I think I said there comes a point in time where you have to come down to a single bidder. We've got so many resources dedicated to servicing KKR's due diligence requirements that the business physically could not take another one on. Chris Weston was quite clear on that when we were looking at the appraisal of the bids. I think he's right. I have my reservations about it at the outset, but I'm sure he's right now. We are being swamped by KKR people. And that is a good sign, because they are seeking to understand the business and make sure they know what they are stepping into. And that's what you would expect any responsible equity investor to do.
Well, the alternative view could be that they are trying to spot opportunities to extract as much value from the business as possible, given that they want a quick exit. But I'd like to move on, if I may, to my final question. Sir Adrian, you mentioned KKR's existing shareholdings in Northumbrian Water, which we understand is around 25%, and it's a passive shareholding. As you mentioned, CKI are the controlling company. Do you expect that shareholding in Northumbrian Water to have any impact on Thames Water's operations and the water sector more broadly?
I think it's more a question of how Ofwat will regard these shareholdings. I think Ofwat is always keen to maintain certainly distance between comparative shareholdings, and I think they like to see independent management. So with independent management, there will be no impact on Thames.
Thank you, Chair.
I mean, Josh's point about the best indicator of future behaviour being past behaviour, that's not just true of KKR, isn't it? It's also true of Thames. And I mean, it looks to me as if we are just going through the same cycle, but it gets worse and worse. 5 years' time, this committee or its successors will be sitting with a different dramatis personae, asking why didn't that turn of the wheel work? Can you tell me I'm wrong here?
Yeah, well, we believe that will not happen. We believe that this team is setting about the rebuilding of the Thames business in a healthy way. I mean, we want to see standards of service, standards of performance return to where they should be. That is what we're all dedicated to do.
I mean, the use of the word believe here is fascinating. I've had a lot of different faith influences in my life, and people will tell me they believe all sorts of things. I've learned over the years that when somebody tells me that this is their faith or their belief, I want to look in this context for some evidence. And while I'm delighted that you're prepared to accept KKR as born-again philanthropists, I'm not seeing just an awful lot of evidence about it. And the difficulty is that if your belief turns out to be wrong and the evidence is correct, then in fact the consequences for the customers get worse and worse.
Against that, I mean, I think that's a legitimate point of view. I've tried to explain that I think it's a point of view based on experience in the private equity business rather than the infrastructure business, where modes of investment are entirely different. But you're right to say it is a belief, and you're right to challenge me on that belief.
And the evidence is that at the point where you could have kept live competition going, you chose not to. You chose to take those who now are seen as born-again philanthropists.
We, with respect, I've tried to explain that we did not think it was a practical opportunity to keep two in the field. I mean, they are working us to the bone.
you accept that there were consequences, then it limits the choices that are available to you at this stage in proceedings.
I think I must go back to what I said originally. There is always a point at which you have to go to one bidder.
Helena, you wanted to come in here, and then we'll finish with Sarah on the question of staff pensions.
Thank you, Chair. Thames is obviously a company with a lot of issues to sort out and a lot of challenges, as we've talked about today. Adrian, I wanted to ask, how often does the board meet at present?
Ordinarily, in a company of this size, you would expect routine board meetings 6 to 10 times a year. In 2023 to 2024, we met 37 times. In the last year, if you include our restructuring committee, we met 50 times. And that, I think, is evidence of how close to the action the board is. We have our fingers on the pulse. We know what's happening. We take the decisions.
And during your evidence this morning, the bonds on the stock market have fallen, which would suggest the market doesn't have a huge amount of confidence in the turnaround plan and the leadership of your company.
I don't think that's the conclusion you should draw. I think the conclusion you should draw is the market has been listening intently to what we have been saying about the need for financial reconstruction and the likely outcome for the creditors.
Okay. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. You've previously confirmed your commitment to attracting and retaining good staff, but there's been considerable concern about the future of Thames Water staff pension, which is 12,000 members and is currently facing a £119 million deficit as at the end of March. Worryingly, that in 2023, Thames Water proposed charging customers £156.6 million to address the shortfall, and of what found that this lacked sufficient and convincing evidence that it is appropriate for customers to pay these costs, rightly so, and blocked Thames Water from doing so. So what steps are you taking to reduce the deficit?
So we have agreed the valuation with both of the pension funds, and we have agreed top-up amounts that are currently being made to the trustees and the pension fund.
What confidence does this give potential new staff when they are looking for new roles?
I think it should give them every confidence in that we are making those payments, and we have an agreed schedule of payments that will go into those pension funds. We're going through or about to start the triennial valuation of the pension funds shortly, and that process will then reassess, as it always does in the normal course of business, whether those top-up payments are appropriate, and Thames would have to agree a mechanism to make up the shortfall. Of course, the whole thing is made a little bit more concerning because of the current situation that Thames is in, but at the moment we have an agreement and we are making those payments.
What confidence does it give your customers that the first place you go to is to them to make that deficit up?
Well, I'm afraid I can't comment on the instance that you refer to, but at the moment our only source of funding is customer revenue in our super senior facility, and we are using the funds that we have to make the payments that we need to into those pension schemes.
You're not aware that in 2023 Thames proposed charging customers £156.6 million to address the shortfall?
No, I mean, I'm not questioning whether you're right or wrong. I'm just not aware of that and all the details in it.
I think that there needs to be accountability there, that decision was made and that request was made. If that is so, what confidence do customers take from that?
So, I mean, I'm not shying away from our accountability for making sure the pension funds are funded in the right way. I mean, it is a process, and we have been through that, and we have agreed a payment profile, and we are making those payments. So, I mean, I'm struggling, I'm sorry, to see what is wrong with that. We've made an agreement, and we are sticking to it.
Mm-hmm. For me, I wanted to get down into a little bit more detail about why you propose going to your customers first to try and claw back some of that deficit. in 2023?
I don't know.
I think this may have been before Chris arrived, and I think it was before I arrived as well. I don't recognise the discussion.
Okay. How confident are you that staff pensions are going to be protected in the case that Thames were to go into special administration?
If it goes into special administration, there will be an impact on the pensions.
Yeah. What will that impact be? And how will you mitigate those?
Well, it will be up to the administrator at the time what they do about those, so it won't be my decision. But there will be an impact on the two different pension schemes and to different cohorts, depending when they are existing pensioners or whether they are receiving a pension or about to receive a pension. And there will be a reduction, I think, across the board of about 10% of payments. It's not pretty.
No. And the BBC reported that employees could see their future pension entitlements reduced as...
Yeah, and it's the last thing I want to have happen.
Yeah. So on that, what discussions have you had with DEFRA and the pensions regulator on safeguarding staff pensions to avoid any derogatory effects on their pensions?
We have had discussions with the pensions regulator about the situation of agreeing the valuation and the new schedule of payments that I have already talked to you about now. If we were to go into SAR, I think the pension funds would go into the Pension Protection Fund, and that's how it would be managed. And that is a process that is outside of my hands, and they would have to decide with the administrator what was done about it.
So going back to my first question, just to confirm, do you think everything that you're putting in place will attract and retain good staff?
I hope so. We're working very hard to attract and retain good staff. I mean, part of that is making progress with the process that we're going through of recapitalising the balance sheet and bringing in a new shareholder, and also in constructing a transformation, a turnaround plan that improves the operation. So I would like to think all that we're doing allows us to continue to attract and retain good people.
Josh, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just finally, Chris, you've painted a very concerning picture. This clearly isn't a pension scheme that's in good health. It's not unique there, but it's obviously very concerning to staff. I asked earlier about staff headcount, pay, terms and conditions, but can you assure your staff, past, current and future, that you'll do everything that you can as CEO to maintain pension benefits as they are now?
Yes, I will. I'll do all that I can.
And again, through the potential change of ownership, the concerns that we've expressed about KKR's ownership, will you make the case to them to ensure that pensions are as they are now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is in everyone's interest that we do exactly that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are, I think, out of time. We're just a little over the allotted session, so I'm going to conclude proceedings at this stage. As you indicated earlier in your evidence, Sir John Cunliffe has been charged by the government with coming up with proposals for reforming the sector. It is our intention that the evidence we've had from you and others will be our submission to that. So it is for Sir John to come up with solutions about how to fix this. The committee has determined that we wish to lay bare the difficulties currently faced by the industry, and I think it's fair to say that the last 2 hours and however many minutes we have added some more insight to that. So we are grateful to you for your attendance, for your evidence, and the committee will publish its determination at a later date. But for today, we conclude proceedings. Order.